I found this quilt a few years ago in Sweden during a business trip. It was in a small store on an old street. The quilt was old and faded, but it had interesting symbols and asymmetrical patterns woven into its intricate fabric. The shopkeeper, a mysterious old Scottish witch named Lucy, said the store was built in the early 1800s. The blanket hung on the wall in the back of the store, which sold magical lotions, potions, and trinkets, as well as books ranging from astrology to demonology. The blanket was cool to the touch and very thick. I was attracted to it. I asked the witch if I could take it off the wall. She said yes. I took it down. It must have been 4 feet wide and 6 feet long. The patterns of the patchwork quilt were interesting and confusing. There was no logic or meaning to them. Random symbols and faded colors, devoid of any uniformity. And yet the patterns seemed to make sense. When I held the blanket, it felt warm in my hands. The weathered salesman, who was probably just over 80, quoted a price of £300. Holding it in my hands, I thought of my mom in rainy and dreary Seattle, who would surely love it. She always loved plaids, bedspreads, and big warm blankets. As she got older, she spent a lot of time on the couch or in a chair, trying to keep warm while watching game shows on TV in the chilly Seattle winters. That's exactly what I wanted. Lucy was in no mood to haggle, so the amount came to £300. Back home, 4 days later, I was eagerly waiting for my mom to show her what I had brought back from Sweden. I travel a lot and always bring her something for my trips. But first, I needed to clean a quilt that had probably been hanging on the wall of the store for 25 years. I turned on the delicate wash mode and dried it in the dryer on low heat for 45 minutes. I took out the blanket I had just washed, then opened the lint trap to shake out what I thought was a lint filter, clogged with dust, debris, and faded fabric from this very old blanket. It was completely empty. No lint. I thought that was very odd for such an old, woven item. I made the 2-hour trip to Seattle to visit my mother. The freshly washed and folded quilt was in the back seat of my car in a large utility bag. My mom greeted me with a hug and a slice of her famous coffee cake, my favorite. She quickly introduced me to local gossip about my old neighborhood and the Seattle weather forecast. I gave her a quilt and made up a story for it from old Scottish folklore. She was thrilled. The huge quilt enveloped my petite mom. She exclaimed how warm it was and asked if I had warmed it in the car on the way home. It was indeed warm to the touch. Apparently, the dense fiber retains heat in some strange way. 3 days later, I got a call from my mom's guardian, who found her in the chair. She had died during the night. I was extremely saddened by this news and glad that I had seen her only a few days before. She seemed so alive and well at that moment. It shook me to the core. My dad passed away 2 years ago, and now my mom was gone as well. I called my sister Jill and Aunt Megan, my mom's only surviving sister. We did her a simple favor, and 4 days later, buried her in the plot next to my dad. Over the next few weeks, I took a leave of absence from work and helped my sister and Aunt Megan clean Mom's house. It's a 2-story mansion that my dad and Mom bought for $13,000 in 1966. It was both a sad and joyful experience. We spent a week cleaning out the closets, basement, and attic of my parents' personal belongings. We cried, laughed, and hugged as we went through old photos and knacks. We planned to put the house on the market next month, so we threw out old furniture and donated things in good condition. We also decided to divide up the memorabilia. Some things I wanted to take for myself, and some things I wanted my sister to take. Aunt Megan wanted to take all the odd collectibles and trinkets. One of the things she insisted on was a quilt. I told her a little about the big quilt, as she called it, and her eyes lit up. Back at work, Christian, my boss, runs me like a madman. He is never completely satisfied and is always condescending. There are days when I truly believe he feels threatened by me. My youth, experience, and charm helped me rise in our software development firm. His ladder to success was more of a rung compared to my front step ladder. He sees the writing on the wall and is worried. His plan is to keep me in a middle position while stabbing me in the back. A few weeks pass, and I get a call from my sister informing me that Aunt Megan has passed away. During a routine weekly visit, my sister found her dead in bed under a pile of blankets. The county coroner stated that she probably died of heart failure while sleeping. She was 70, 8 years old, 4 years younger than my mother. I tell my supervisor that I need to take a couple days off to make funeral arrangements for my aunt and sister. My aunt never had children of her own. My boss, Christian, reluctantly agreed to take parental leave, but I swear he was on the verge of asking me to provide proof. First my mom last month, now my aunt, and I can see the dark, unlubricated gears turning in his cavernous and suspicious head. He's such a tool. So, my sister Jill and I were assigned to clean up my aunt's apartment. Sure, there's less space, less trash, but there's still a lot of knickknacks. We threw everything out. I saw the blanket on my aunt's bed and picked it up. It radiated warmth, like it had just come out of the gas dryer. It beckoned. I wanted to bring it to my face. Deep beneath the subtle scent of the dryer sheets, I could smell the faint, damp odor of earth. I picked up my quilt from Sweden, intending to give it a good wash when I got home. When I got home, my Jack Russell Terrier, Snickers, jumped up to greet me. At 2 years old, Snickers has more energy than an Energizer bunny and is by far the sweetest dog I've ever had. I can be gone for 10 minutes, and she'll still go crazy like I've been gone for 2 weeks. After dinner, I throw the blanket in the washer and dry it in it for about 90 minutes because of its size. Again, there is absolutely no lint left in the dryer catcher after the drying cycle is complete. I looked at the old tattered blanket at the bottom of the Snickers box and decided to improve the quality of my little girl's blanket. I lined the bottom of her drawer with a Swiss quilt. Why not? I thought at the time. I don't need it. One morning, Snickers died suddenly. 3 days later, left alone in her cage. My morning ritual for the past 2 years was reversed when I approached her cage to take her for her morning walk. She was lying on the blanket with her eyes wide open and her mouth open for one last desperate breath. I looked around for anything resembling poison or a choking hazard she might have encountered. Nothing. For days after trying to make sense of Snickers' death, I wandered around the house with an iced whiskey in my hand, trying to figure out what had happened. The vet said she could do an autopsy, but it would cost $2,000. The vet, out of the blue, said that some dogs are born with heart defects and that you would never know it if you bought them as a puppy. Sometimes it's breed related, sometimes it's just bad luck. I looked in her crate. A blanket was in plain sight. The blanket, my mom, my aunt, and now my dog as well. Shaking my head, trying to clear away the cobwebs soaked in duct tape, I try to convince myself that the blanket had nothing to do with it. I call my sister and ask how exactly she found Aunt Carol. Tina says she was lying in bed, covered by a large blanket. The next day, I find my mother's guardian's phone number. I ask her the same question. How did she find my mom the day she died? Shelia's guardian said she was lying peacefully in a chair wrapped in a heavy plaid blanket. I described the blanket to Shelia, and she immediately confirmed that it was a tartan blanket that I had purchased. Okay, so what is it? I spent the next 4 days researching this quilt online. The faded colors, sizes, intricate and haphazard woven patterns did nothing to explain this strange phenomenon. Of course, Norm finds it necessary to leave me nasty phone messages and emails since I've decided not to go to work. Finally, I decide to call Switzerland to have a little chat with Lucy the witch. During my visit a few months ago, Lucy was less than forthright. The origin of the quilt dates back to the 1400s, not the 1800s, not the 1800s. This item is over 600 years old. She also said that she hung it on the wall for some reason, but didn't elaborate. Noticing a customer in the store, Lucy abruptly interrupted the conversation. With the help of Google, I discovered that the inscription on the quilt is Latin for Shroud of the Dead. Digging deeper, I discovered that there is a Swiss myth that claims that sleeping with this shroud for 3 consecutive nights summons the Black Angel of Death. Simply put, the Grim Reaper. My mother, aunt, and Megan slept under this blanket for at least 3 days in a row. This myth is pretty darn real. I take the blanket out to the backyard, put it in the fire, and douse it with gasoline. I hesitate, striking a wooden match. The pattern of the blanket changed slightly as he sat down by the fire. I stood as if hypnotized, on the verge of catatonia, holding the lit match close to my fingers. The patterns on the blankets were moving. I turn around and quickly toss the match into the fire pit filled with gasoline. The match goes out instantly. I flick another match, toss it, and the fire goes out again, as if the quilt had water in it instead of gas. I add crumpled old newspaper and lighter fluid to add oil to the fire, but still nothing. The blanket doesn't burn. Leaving the blanket on fire, I return to work the next day, only to be fired by my jerk of a boss. Christina finally gets a chance to justify my firing. He had met with her the week before and laid out his reasoning. They agreed, and I was fired. 1 cardboard box of my belongings and a check for 2 weeks severance pay was all I walked out of the firm I had worked for over 5 years. Weeks go by as I try to make sense of the Scottish death shroud situation. 3 times I wake up in the middle of the night, standing over the fire and looking at the quilt. I stand half asleep, rocking back and forth, mesmerized by the metamorphosis of the patterns on the quilt. It drew me in and held me like the pull of the moon. The blanket went from the fire to the trash can. Trash pickup is in 2 days. This morning, I woke up and found myself hiding in my bed quilt. Somewhere in the dream, I apparently went outside, took it from the trash barrel, and brought it to my bed, wrapping it around me. There was an intense warmth coming from the blanket. I slept with the blanket one night, 2 more, and I'm dead. What the hell? That's weird. It was supposed to smell like gasoline and lighter fluid, but now it's just damp and musty. I need to get rid of it once and for all. The quilt is alive and I didn't want it anywhere near me. So I took the damn shroud, subjected it to 2 cycles of washing and drying. Then I sprayed it with a medium, folded it carefully, and put it, still radiating heat, in a beautiful gift box. The next day, I took the box to a local store and mailed it anonymously to Christian's wife.